Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place that takes really complex, sometimes dense source material, and we try to break it down into something genuinely understandable, actionable even.
And today, we're tackling some material that's incredibly profound. It really gets into the structure of, well, reality itself, authority, destiny, the big stuff.
Yeah, we're diving deep into the identity, the power packed into just one name. Yesu, you probably know it as Jesus.
Yes.
And these sources, they claim this single name dictates, well, pretty much everything, how God governs the fate of creation.
It's huge. The sources we're looking at position Yesu as the name, the one above all names, and they link it directly to supreme divine ownership, the right to rule, and even the mechanics of justice and love across all of time and space.
So our mission today is critical. We need to unpack this relationship. You've got the Godhead. The sources talk about a first, second, and third God.
Yep.
Then there's this, frankly, astonishing choice by the second God to become a creature.
Right, and how that connects to the cross, its cosmic purpose.
And then there's this non-negotiable link, according to the sources, between divine holiness, all focused in that name, and the ultimate outcome for every being. This idea of rest. It's like we're mapping out the theological mechanics of the universe.
Definitely. So where do we start? Maybe with that hierarchy, the structure at the very top, and the surprising equality within the Godhead itself.
Perfect. Let's get into it.
Okay, so the first thing these sources lay out, and it's vital, is this baseline of complete equality.
Between the first and second God.
Exactly. They're defined as equal. Shaish is the term used. Same inherent worth, same power, same being. It's not like one is senior, one is junior. It's parity.
Okay, parity. So if they are truly equal then, well, what does that mean for creatures? For us down here in space-time?
It means worship is owed equally. The sources are really clear. Creatures must worship the second God and the Lord Yesu with the same devotion, the same reverence as they worship the first God.
No distinction in the worship requirement.
None. And that requirement, that baseline, it sets the stage for the next massive event, the really gravity-defining action.
Which is the self-limitation.
Yeah.
The second God choosing to step down, so to speak.
Right. The second God, even though he keeps that absolute equality with the first God, voluntarily does something radical. He lowers himself, becomes a creature. Ooh, you know.
And the sources frame this not as losing status, but as a strategic move.
Precisely. It's not a demotion. It's positioned as the necessary step for what comes next, inheriting the name Yesu.
Inheriting. But didn't the name belong to him already in a divine sense?
Yes, that's a key point the sources make. In a timeless divine reality, the name was his. But the inheritance is crucial because it happens within space-time for creatures.
Ah, okay. So it's like making it official within our frame of reference. Formalizing it for creatures who only understand things in terms of time and sequence.
You've got it. It's almost like an administrative act framed for the thought processes of creatures bound by time. The power itself didn't increase, but its application, its visibility and recognizability to creation gets channeled through this specific historical person and name, Yesu.
A channel of authority customized for creation. Make sense?
And once that channel's established, the authority flowing through that name is, well, absolute. The sources don't mince words here. The name Yesu is placed above every other name. L-I-O-U.
Every single one. What does that mean practically in terms of like cosmic governance?
It means Yesu holds the ultimate rights. All of them. Ownership rights over every atom, every being. Ruling rights are the right to govern everything. And maybe most critically, the right to judge everything across all space-time, past, present, future. It's total.
Wow. Okay, and this echoes things we see in texts like Philippians, right?
Yeah.
That seems to be a key touchstone for these sources.
Absolutely. Philippians 2 is presented as the scriptural confirmation. It highlights the sort of transactional nature of it almost because the second God humbled himself, became a creature, even died on a cross. Therefore, the first God highly exalted him, gave him that name, the one above all names. And it's not just an honorific title, it's a universal mandate.
A command for everything to bow.
Every knee. Every single entity, in heaven, on earth, under the earth, they must bow to the name Yesu. It locks that name in as the absolute, unavoidable center of reality for all creatures.
The ultimate control mechanism. So what about the meaning? Does the actual meaning of the name Yesu tell us anything about the nature of that control?
It tells us everything. The name itself, Yesu, it encapsulates the entire purpose of the being who is in relation to his creation. It means he who is salvation. Well, Oyujin.
He who is salvation.
Wow.
So the very name defines the fundamental nature of his rule. It's ultimately about deliverance.
Yes, it enters his authority in salvation, redemption, life. That's the core. So if the name itself means salvation, then every divine action, creating, ruling, even judging, must somehow flow from that premise. It dictates the whole logic.
That's the framework the sources build. It connects the fundamental reality, he who is, with the fundamental action towards creation, salvation. But, and this is crucial, that authority includes judgment as part of salvation.
How so?
Because true salvation, true rest for creation, requires dealing with the things that destroy peace and life. So the sources say this authority means he will personally judge and eliminate those who persist in trampling their neighbors, those who cause suffering.
So salvation necessitates removing the obstacles to salvation, even if that removal is forceful.
Exactly. It shows that achieving salvation, achieving that state of rest, requires the elimination of its opposite. The name, therefore, isn't just a title. It's the blueprint for how existence functions under perfect, loving, but also just rule. Okay, you mentioned that huge shift caused by the incarnation. Before the second God actually entered space-time as one of us, essentially, creatures related to God very differently. Let's dig into why that shift was necessary.
Right. The necessity really boils down to visibility and direct interaction. Before the second God came personally as a creature, creatures just couldn't, well, see God. Not physically.
Even angels.
Even angels, according to these sources. Their worship was, you could say, mediated. They worshipped God through the idea of the name, the authority represented by the name placed on the throne. It was veneration based on unseen holiness, delegated power.
So abstract. Worship of a concept, almost.
In a way, yes. But the incarnation, that solved the visibility problem radically. It made the object of worship tangible, relatable, physically present.
You can actually see God.
Exactly. Actually see God. Yeah, that's the phrase used. And therefore, you could directly worship the God who became a creature. It bridged that infinite gap. Worship went from being maybe a theological exercise to a personal visual encounter.
Okay, that makes sense. But this leads to maybe one of the trickiest ideas in these sources. The claim that the divine name itself changed, or at least its application did, from judgment to salvation. How does the cross make that happen?
Yeah, this is complex. It hinges on the inherent problem of creatures existing before a perfectly holy God. The name he who is, Vishu, in its pure, unmediated holiness. Well, for creatures, it's inherently a name of judgment.
Why judgment? Because creatures inevitably fall short.
Precisely. Because creatures, just by being finite or misunderstanding God's love or simply failing to meet that perfect standard, they sin. It's inevitable in their condition.
So standing before he who is without any kind of intervention, that just reveals the creature's flaws, which automatically triggers judgment, like a perfect mirror.
That's a good way to put it. It's the default setting. Your imperfection is exposed by his perfection, and the result is judgment, death. But through the Lord Yesu, that same name, he who is, isn't just a declaration of perfect being anymore. It becomes he who is salvation. The name's application towards creatures is fundamentally shifted, perfected.
And the sources point to a very specific mechanism for that shift. It wasn't just God deciding to be nicer. It required an event.
A physical cosmic event, yes. The sources are absolutely clear. The blood of the Lord Yesu is the critical agent.
The blood is what changes the name's effect from judgment to salvation.
It's presented as the catalyst, the action that transforms the name of default judgment into a name of guaranteed salvation. It takes creatures who are headed for judgment and makes them fundamentally savable, allowing them to exist in the presence of that holy name without being destroyed.
Okay, we need to pause there. How does the blood do that?
Yeah.
What's the logic connecting the physical blood to the legal or theological status of the name?
The logic presented is rooted in justice, perfect justice. If the commandment, God's law, is perfect, then violating it demands a consequence, death. Justice has to be satisfied.
Okay, the principle of justice must be upheld.
Right. Now, the second God, being equal to the first God, his life has infinite value. So when that infinite life is voluntarily given up, sacrificed in creature form,
It pays the infinite debt.
it satisfies the infinite consequence of sin for all creation. The blood doesn't ignore justice, it fulfills it perfectly. And because the debt is paid by the owner of the name himself.
Then the name's application must become salvation, because there's no outstanding debt to judge.
Exactly. Justice is satisfied, the books are balanced, you could say. So the name that represented perfect justice can now only represent deliverance for those under it without compromising the holiness of the law one bit.
Wow. So the cross is like God taking ultimate financial responsibility for creation's debt, ensuring the system remains just while allowing for salvation.
A powerful image. And this act of fulfillment, this payment, it also centralizes all the glory. All the praise from creation now flows through the incarnate one, through Yesu.
And the sources talk about the whole Godhead receiving this glory together.
Yes, the triune unity is stressed. The Son comes in the Father's name, the Spirit comes in the Son's name. So Father, Son, and Holy Spirit all receive glory from creation, but it's channeled through the name Yesu.
It's the single access point for glory, from space-time back to the divine.
That's the idea. It's the cosmic conduit.
Now, the sources also hammer home that the cross is proof, definitive proof, of both God's love and his justice. Why is seeing both essential for this whole system to work eternally? Why not just love?
Well, think about it. If creatures only saw raw justice, inflexible law, they might obey, sure, but probably out of fear. And fear, the sources imply, often leads to misunderstanding, resentment, maybe even rebellion down the line.
Okay, fear isn't a stable foundation. What about only love?
If they only saw love without consequences, a sort of cheap grace, maybe they'd take God's holiness for granted, presume upon it, keep sinning because, hey, he loves us anyway.
So the cross forces creation to confront both realities simultaneously.
Exactly. It proves the commandment is deadly. Serious justice demands death. But it also proves God's love is so immense, he became the payment himself. Seeing both, understanding the depth of that love shown on the cross, that's the key.
And that understanding is what guarantees eternal life.
That's the claim. Grasping that proof, the terrible cost, and the incredible love ensures that creatures who truly get it will never want to sin again. They understand the stakes, they understand the love, and so they choose life, and thus they never die.
So the misunderstanding of God is the root of sin and death.
And the cross is the ultimate cure for that misunderstanding. It was a necessary cosmic demonstration to stabilize creation under a name that now guarantees salvation because justice has been perfectly satisfied.
Okay, so if the name guarantees life through this fulfilled justice, that brings us squarely to the law itself, the commandment. If the system is geared towards salvation, the law can't be inherently bad, can it?
It really can't be. And the sources are emphatic here. God rules space-time through what they call the commandment of love. Gotcha going. And here's where they make a claim that honestly pushes against a lot of common theological thinking.
Which is?
That the commandment is something creatures are actually able to keep. Yeah, China. It wasn't designed as an impossible test just to make everyone fail.
Wait, really? The sources say humans, creatures, could have kept it. That it wasn't inherently too hard.
That's what they state, clearly. The law itself isn't the problem. It's not a trap designed for failure. It's meant to be the pathway to flourishing, to life.
So if the law is feasible, why did sin happen? Why do creatures fail and end up dying?
The sources argue it stems from misunderstanding, mistrust. If creatures fundamentally misunderstand God, if they think the commandment was just given to condemn them, or if they believe it's impossible anyway...
They've already given up internally.
Exactly. They've poisoned their own will with suspicion and mistrust. And that misunderstanding, that faulty view of God's name, his nature, his intentions, that prevents the wholehearted trust and obedience needed for life. So they die, not because the law was intrinsically impossible, but because their perception of God and his law was broken.
So death isn't just punishment for breaking a rule, it's the natural consequence of operating with a flawed understanding of the Creator. Like a program crashing because it rejects the operating system's core code.
That's a great analogy. It's a self-destruct sequence triggered by mistrust. And if this flawed perception, this misunderstanding is the core issue, well, then there needs to be some future event that just wipes away all doubt permanently for everyone.
And that's where the first resurrection comes in. The first boo wall.
Precisely. That's its grand cosmic purpose in this framework.
What exactly do the sources say it will accomplish?
It's described as the event that will finally prove the truthfulness of the commandment. It's the ultimate validation. The moment when all misunderstandings about God's love, his justice, the fairness of his rule, they just vanish. For every creature watching or participating.
Like the universe finally sees the ultimate proof and all arguments stop. The final QED.
Exactly. And this leads us to probably the most intriguing detail the sources offer about the first resurrection, maybe even controversial.
Which involves the angels.
Yes. The sources claim something quite radical, that until the first resurrection happens, the possibility of sin actually remains even with the angels.
Oh.
Really?
Even the loyal angels aren't fully locked in yet.
That's the implication, and the first resurrection is what will finally extinguish that possibility for them, perfecting their free will.
That really changes how we usually think about angels, doesn't it?
Right.
We tend to assume they're either fallen or irrevocably holy.
It does suggest a more dynamic situation, doesn't it? The idea is that even the angels, while witnessing God's glory, haven't yet seen the full space-time demonstration of the commandment's truthfulness finally resolved in glorified creatures.
So they're waiting for the proof involving beings like us.
Apparently so. Until they see the first resurrection, see saved creatures raised, vindicating the name and the commandment, showing the final victory over sin and death within creation, their understanding, and thus their free will, isn't absolutely finalized. There's still, theoretically, some tiny space for doubt or misunderstanding to creep in.
So the first resurrection isn't just for humans, it's a universe-stabilizing event.
That's how it's presented. It acts as the ultimate lock. It extinguishes the possibility of sin among the angels because they will have witnessed the complete story. The cost of sin, the payment through Yesu, the justice, the love, and the final undeniable proof of life guaranteed under the perfected name.
And that undeniable proof removes any lingering ambiguity.
Right. It perfects their free will, not by taking it away, but by making the choice against God unthinkable, impossible, because the truth of his goodness and justice is overwhelmingly, visibly proven. Their freedom moves from being able not to sin to being happily unable to conceive of sinning.
So the entire creation, spiritual and physical, is kind of holding its breath, waiting for this final proof point to achieve true, universal, perfected freedom and stability.
It seems so. The name, the incarnation, the cross, the resurrection, they're not just random events. They're sequential, necessary steps to stabilize the entire cosmos under the rule of love, ensuring no creature, human or angel, ever misunderstands God again. That's a massive framework.
Okay, let's bring this down from the cosmic level to how this authority actually plays out with, well, messy reality, sinners in space-time. The sources argue that God's actions, even when they look like extreme mercy or harsh judgment, are always about one thing: protecting the divine name.
Yes, that's presented as the core operating principle in practice. God keeps his name holy, protects its reputation, specifically so that creatures can live eternally. The name's sanctity is the bedrock of life. God's baseline motivation, remember, is not to let creatures die.
Which leads to situations where God shows restraint, even when, maybe, human justice would demand immediate punishment.
Exactly. The sources use the example of God's chosen people, Israel, if they sinned and God immediately wiped them out. Think about what the neighboring nations, the other creatures watching, would conclude.
They'd think God is trigger-happy, likes killing.
Precisely. They'd misunderstand God as someone who likes to kill creatures.
Yeah.
And that perception, that would horribly defile the divine name. It would poison the well for everyone.
Because if the name is seen as malicious or unreliable, nobody can trust it. And that leads back to the fatal misunderstanding we talked about.
Exactly. Universal mistrust would set in, preventing obedience based on love, and ultimately, the sources argue, it would lead to the death of all creatures. They'd all fall into that trap of misunderstanding God's true nature. So sparing people who maybe don't deserve it, it's not actually favoritism. It's a strategic necessity. It's framed as a necessity to protect the name's reputation for the sake of the whole system. Preserving the name's perceived goodness is crucial for everyone else's survival. It's universal preservation, not preferential treatment.
Okay, that requires a really clear definition then of what God actually loves and what he actively hates.
And the sources provide one. God loves all his creation. Israelites, Egyptians, Canaanites, everyone. Why? Because they are his property, his creation.
He loves the creatures, but he hates.
He hates sin, but the definition here is very specific, very operational. It's defined as the act of trampling upon one's neighbor.
That sounds active.
Yeah.
Like oppression causing suffering, not just breaking a rule in private.
Exactly. It's defined as something that makes creatures suffer. It's about social cruelty, economic exploitation, political oppression, abusing the vulnerable. That's the sin God actively hates.
And crucially, his hatred for that sin comes from his love for the creature being trampled.
Yes. It's love-driven hatred. Love for the victim compels hatred for the act of victimization. And that hatred isn't passive. It demands action. It means God will fight against those who persist in that kind of crime, that oppression.
And the goal of that fight, that intervention, is to establish what the sources call rest, anshik.
Right. And let's be clear, anshik isn't just taking a nap. It's profound. It encompasses peace, Sabbath rest, ultimate liberation from suffering.
So for creatures, rest means living in a state where you're finally safe, free from the fear of being trampled, free from the suffering caused by sin and oppression.
Yes, stability, security, flourishing under the commandment of love. That's Anshik.
But achieving that universal state of rest, it requires someone to actually deal with the tramplers, the oppressors.
It requires the Messiah to act as judge and executor. The promise is that he will judge sin and completely destroy the criminals who refuse to stop, thereby establishing that rest.
Which leads to that really challenging conclusion you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Yes. That God's judgment is another expression of love. It's presented as the necessary, unavoidable step required for creatures to finally experience Anshik. The sources are blunt. The Lord Yesu, ruling by love, will personally burn and kill the criminals who trample their neighbors.
Okay, I have to push on this again because it feels like a contradiction. If God loves creatures and hates suffering, how is inflicting the ultimate suffering, burning and killing an act of love, even for the worst oppressor?
It is the core tension, absolutely. The way the sources resolve it is by framing the judgment as fundamentally protective and liberating for the rest of creation for the long term.
Unnecessary evil, almost.
More like a necessary act of justice for the sake of universal eternal life and peace. If the persistent, unrepentant oppressor isn't permanently removed, the cycle of trampling, suffering, and the potential death of all creatures through the violation of the commandment, it would continue indefinitely.
So for the rest to be permanent and universal, the source of the disruption must be permanently eliminated.
That's the logic. The judgment secures the Anshik for the vast majority, forever. It's presented as a severe, yes, but ultimately loving act of restorative justice for the entire cosmos, like removing a cancerous tumor to save the body.
So back to the name. He who is salvation. That salvation is achieved through establishing rest, which requires judging and removing the agents of suffering. Love demands the death of unrepentant, harmful sin to protect the life of the whole.
It's the ultimate executive function tied to the name. It's tough, but it's internally consistent within the framework presented. And this principle, protecting the name to guarantee life, is exactly what we see playing out in specific historical crises in the Old Testament narratives the sources highlight. Right, the sources point directly to the wilderness stories, Exodus and Numbers. They show God making decisions, seemingly drastic ones, that are consistently filtered through this lens. How will this affect my name, my reputation, in the eyes of the watching world?
We're talking about those moments where Israel really messes up and God is ready to just start over.
Exactly. Two huge crises. First, Exodus 32, the golden calf incident right after the covenant is made. God literally says to Moses, "Let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, and I will make of you a great nation."
Wipe them out. Start again with Moses.
Wow. And the second is Numbers 14. After the spies come back with that negative report, the people rebel, want to go back to Egypt. Again, God says to Moses, "I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they."
Same scenario. Total destruction proposed. But Moses steps in.
And his intercession in both cases is just masterful. He doesn't argue that Israel deserves mercy. He knows they don't. He calls them stiff-necked.
So what does he argue?
He argues based entirely on God's own stated priority, the sanctity and reputation of the divine name. He basically holds up a mirror to God's own character and motivations.
Okay, break down his arguments. What are the key points he makes?
There are basically three pillars to his argument. First, after the golden calf, he says, "Why should the Egyptians say, 'With evil intent did he bring them out, to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth?'"
Ah, the Egyptian perspective. If God saves them dramatically, then kills them, Egypt will say God is malicious, deceitful, that he never intended salvation.
Exactly. It directly attacks God's character. It suggests he who is salvation is actually he who is treachery. It defiles the name by questioning God's motives.
Okay, argument one. Don't look like a malicious liar to the Egyptians. What's the second?
The second comes in Numbers 14, after the spies incident. He says the other nations who've heard about God's power in the Exodus, if they hear God wiped out Israel in the wilderness, they won't say Israel was wicked. They'll say, because the Lord was not able to bring this people into the land that he swore to give to them, therefore he has killed them in the wilderness.
So this one attacks God's power, his competence. The nations will think God bit off more than he could chew. He couldn't finish the job.
Precisely. It's about God's credibility as a capable ruler. If he starts this huge project liberating a people, promising them a land, and then aborts it by destroying them, the conclusion isn't about Israel's sin, it's about God's perceived weakness or failure. His omnipotence is questioned, the name's power is doubted.
Okay, character and competence. What's the third pillar?
He reminds God of the foundational promise, the covenant sworn to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do not look on the stubbornness of this people. He's linking God's present action to his past promises, his eternal faithfulness. His name is bound to his word.
So Moses isn't really changing God's mind, is he? It sounds more like he's reminding God of the rules God himself established for preserving the name.
That's exactly how the sources frame it. Moses successfully appeals to God's own non-negotiable commitment. God has to spare them, despite their actions, precisely to protect the name from being misunderstood or defamed among the nations.
The name acts as the ultimate restraint on God's own righteous anger.
Yes, and this isn't just a one-off crisis management technique. The sources show this principle continuing through the prophets, especially Ezekiel. It becomes God's standard operating procedure.
Ezekiel really emphasizes this for my name's sake idea, doesn't he?
He does. Ezekiel 20, for instance, says God brought Israel out of Egypt in the first place, despite their rebellions even back then, for the sake of my name, that it should not be profaned in the sight of the nations among whom they lived. It was a reputation play from the start.
Establishing the name's power and saving nature on the world stage.
Right. And then later, when Israel is judged and scattered into exile, the name gets profaned again, but in a different way.
How so? During the exile.
Ezekiel 36 describes it. When the Israelites were scattered among the nations looked at them and said, "These are the people of the Lord," and yet they had to go out of his land.
So the exile made it look like God was weak, unable to protect his own people, his own land, like the local gods were stronger, or God just abandoned his project.
Exactly. It damaged God's reputation for sovereignty and faithfulness. The name was profaned because its earthly representatives, the people tied to that land, were seen as defeated and rejected.
So how does God respond to that profanation? Does he just write them off?
No. He declares he will act again. He will restore Israel, gather them back, cleanse them. But crucially, he says he's doing it not for Israel's sake. They're still the reason the name was profaned, but for the sake of my holy name. It is not for your sake, O house of Israel, that I am about to act, but for the sake of my holy name, which you have profaned among the nations.
He acts solely to sanctify his own name again, to restore his reputation.
Yes. The restoration itself becomes the ultimate demonstration to the nations that God is powerful, faithful, and sovereign. It all circles back to the name.
The lesson seems crystal clear then. From mercy to judgment to restoration, it's all meticulously calculated based on preserving the integrity and reputation of the divine name, because that name's holiness is what ultimately guarantees life and makes rest possible for anyone in space-time.
That's the unifying thread the sources trace. If the name's reputation fails, the whole system collapses.
Okay, we've followed the logic. The name holds supreme authority. It was perfected towards salvation through the cross. And protecting that name's reputation guides God's actions, ensuring creation's survival and eventual rest. But this leaves us with the biggest question, doesn't it? The one the sources themselves raise.
The why? Why bother?
Exactly. Why does God, who the sources describe as perfectly complete and happy all by himself, even create anything in the first place? If protecting the name and achieving his own glory is the goal, why initiate a process that involves so much trouble, so much cost, like the cross?
We have to start where the sources start, with God's absolute self-sufficiency. He is he who is our more inherently complete, inherently happy, alone.
That's fundamental. God doesn't need creation. He wasn't lonely. He wasn't lacking anything that creatures could provide.
Correct. Creation isn't about fulfilling a need in God. The sources explicitly rule that out, referencing Job. Job 35 basically says, your sin doesn't hurt God, your righteousness doesn't help him. Creatures find their happiness in obeying him, yes, but God doesn't exist for the creature's happiness. It's not about him serving us.
The relationship is entirely asymmetrical. He is the self-existent source. We are the contingent creation.
Which means the purpose of creation must be fundamentally God-centered, not creature-centered. We exist for him, not the other way around.
And the sources state this directly.
Unequivocally. They point to Colossians 1.16, all things, visible, invisible, thrones, dominions, powers, whatever were created by him, and, the crucial part, for him.
For him. So all of space-time, every creature, ultimately exists for God's purpose, God's glory. Like Isaiah says, the people he formed to declare his praise.
Exact. Isaiah 43.21. Creatures exist to praise God. So the entire cosmic drama, creating, securing rest, providing salvation, sanctifying the name, judging evil, it's all, at the deepest level, done for God himself.
It's about God maintaining and expressing his own inherent glory within the created order.
That's the conclusion, and Isaiah 48:11 is quoted as the ultimate statement of this. For my own sake I do it. For how should my name be profaned? My glory I will not give to another. Preserving the name, refusing to let his glory be diminished or given away, that's the driving motivation. And it just so happens that our life, our salvation, our rest is secured within that God-centered purpose.
Okay, we've tracked the mechanics involving the name, the cross, judgment, mercy.
Wow.
We've tracked the who it's for, ultimately God himself, but
we still hit that wall. The fundamental why start it all.
the great unanswered question, as you called it.
And the sources are refreshingly honest here. Despite establishing God's perfect self-sufficiency, his complete happiness alone, they explicitly state that the ultimate reason why such a God would choose to create creatures, knowing the cost, knowing the sacrifice required, well, the answer is, we don't know.
It remains a mystery, a theological black box. We see the intricate solution he engineered, but the original impulse to create the problem that needed solving. That's beyond our grasp.
It really is. And the sources underscore the depth of this mystery by pointing to the sheer cost involved. They end that thought by referencing Yesu in Gethsemane.
The agony in the garden, let this cup pass from me.
Yet not my will, but yours be done. That raw anguish, the sources suggest, highlights the immense, almost unbearable personal price paid by the second God in becoming a creature and fulfilling this plan. The suffering was real, it was catastrophic.
So the cost confirms the creation and rescue wasn't just some casual whim. It mattered deeply, but the reason for wanting to incur that cost in the first place.
That remains hidden within the nature of the self-sufficient, perfectly happy God. We see the effects of his love and purpose in the name and the cross, but the origin of that outgoing desire is where our creaturely logic simply stops. #tag outro. So we've covered a huge amount of ground today. Really challenging, deep material. We started with that name, Yesu.
Yeah, the name signifying supreme authority, ownership, the right to judge.
And we saw how the sources argue that the incredible act, the second God becoming a creature, dying on the cross, wasn't about abolishing justice, but fulfilling it. And in doing so, it transformed the name's primary impact.
Right, from the necessary judgment inherent in he who is to the guaranteed salvation offered by he who is salvation.
And the core takeaway, maybe, is how unified God's actions are presented. Whether it looks like mercy sparing Israel for the name's sake, or like severe judgment eliminating the oppressors to establish rest, it's all driven by one single purpose.
Protecting the holiness of the divine name. Because that holiness is the very mechanism that ensures life and rest, on Shikes, can exist for creation.
Exactly. Love and judgment aren't opposites here. They're presented as two sides of the same coin, both flowing from the commandment, both necessary to maintain a stable, living cosmos under God's rule.
A system where, maybe paradoxically for us, God acting for his own sake, his own glory, ends up being the ultimate guarantee of our existence and well-being.
Which brings us right back to that final, really provocative tension we found in the source material near the end. We touched on those two ways of looking at the name on the throne.
Yeah, the question of whether the name was always he who is salvation, meaning salvation was intrinsic in the cross, just revealed it or educated us about it.
Or the alternative view was the name originally just he who is, representing pure being and therefore pure justice judgment for imperfect creatures, and it was only perfected or completed into he who is salvation through the necessary act of the incarnation and the shedding of blood on the cross.
That difference, revealed versus perfected, it really changes how you think about the cross, doesn't it? Was it primarily educational, or was it fundamentally legal and transformative, even for God's relationship with the name?
It's a fundamental fork in the theological road presented by these sources. So the question we leave you with is this. How does wrestling with that debate, unveiled salvation versus perfected salvation, influence your understanding of why God rules space-time the way he does? Which view better explains the sheer necessity, the agony of the second God's suffering that we see in Gethsemane? Something to think about.
Definitely something to chew on. We'll catch you on the next
Okay.
Deep Dive.